The Top 10 Most Forgotten Presidents by Anna Settlemeyer, Kaylee Drake, Grace Bellinger, and Caroline Wills. First off, we have Ulysses S. Grant. Grant is most well known for his military successes rather than his presidential ones. He served as Lincoln's general for most of the Civil War and led the Union to a victory over Robert E. Lee's Confederacy. Although he did have some civil rights successes following his election in 1868, he did not have much economic success and was not easily able to resolve the Panic of 1873. Grant was the first president to ease vigilance over Congress, and the government became riddled with corruption toward the end of his presidency. Grant was a successful military leader, but an average president with a few major successes, placing him at number 10 on the list of forgotten presidents. Next up, we have James Garfield. Garfield never really wanted to become president. His name was put forward at the Republican National Convention in 1880, and he won the election that same year. He had hoped to have a productive presidency geared towards civil rights and economic and education reform, but his assassination cut his plans short. The same year he was inaugurated, he was shot in the back at the old Baltimore and Potomac train station. Unlike Ford's Theater or the Dealey Plaza in Dallas, this site of a presidential assassination holds little importance today and was always thought to be an eyesore. He lingered for a few months but was unable to perform any of his presidential duties. Garfield's lack of time in office and historically insignificant assassination earned him the number 9 spot on the list. Next up is Martin Van Buren. Van Buren was the first American-born man to be president. He won the election of 1836 and was the 8th president of the United States. He had to follow a line of presidents of founding fathers that largely set the foundation of the American government. He avoided war at all costs with the British on the northern border, but his greatest downfall was assuming the blame for the Panic of 1837, the financial crisis caused by Andrew Jackson's decision to eliminate the Second Bank of the United States and institute pet or state banks. The recession destroyed Van Buren's reputation and prevented him from winning a second term as president. His opportunity to make a lasting impact on the United States became non-existent, and he easily escapes the minds of most Americans, making him number 8 on the list. In the number 7 slot, we have Zachary Taylor. Taylor is another example of a war hero who became president with little political experience, as he was credited for earning the U.S. victory in the Mexican War. He was elected in 1848 and served from 1849 to 1850 in office. He was not able to get much done in his short 15 months in office, and because he held office following James K. Polk, who ensured the admission of Texas as a slave state, Congress was split evenly between slave and free states. Taylor died not long into his term of the stomach flu, and his hands were tied in terms of policy due to the restriction of a divided Congress, placing him at number 7 on the list. Next, we have James Buchanan. Buchanan was elected president in 1856 and served just one term. One reason he is largely overlooked is because his term was directly before the election of Abraham Lincoln. Buchanan had apparent indifference toward a civil war that was clearly inevitable. While he did believe that secession of the southern states that occurred toward the end of his presidency was illegal, he believed that it was not within federal power to stop it, which was the opposite approach that Lincoln took when he was inaugurated. He also believed that it was not within his constitutional power as president to become actively involved in the issue of slavery. Buchanan's lack of action as president in terms of slavery and secession, followed by Lincoln's actions to suppress them, makes him easily forgettable and sets him at number 6 on the list. In the number 5 slot, we have Jimmy Carter. Jimmy Carter served as the 39th president from 1977 to 1981. Americans try to forget about the Iranian hostage crisis, in which 52 U.S. citizens were taken hostage from the U.S. Embassy in Tehran following the overthrow of the country's government. Negotiations lasted 444 days, and, in spite of Carter, the hostages were not released by Iran until the day Richard Nixon took office. This event is considered one of Carter's greatest failures. He also struggled to handle many of America's greatest problems of time, including the energy crisis and high inflation and unemployment. Carter lost his re-election campaign by a landslide to Ronald Reagan, whose accomplishments regarding foreign policy and economics will always overshadow Carter's efforts, ranking him at number 5 on the list of forgotten presidents. Next is John Tyler. Tyler served nearly a full term in office after assuming the presidency following the death of 9th President William Henry Harrison. The biggest challenge that Tyler faced was the process of presidential succession. Congress and even his own cabinet did not take him seriously because he was not elected, and no precedent had been set for this situation. It was unknown whether he served as acting president until an immediate election took place, or if he assumed the role until the next scheduled election. He was not able to enact much policy reform because his duties were uncertain. Later in his presidency, he had disputes with the Whig Party and was eventually kicked out of the party. He also tried to find a solution to Southern secession, an issue that arose during Jackson's presidency but failed. John Tyler is not a remembered president because he got little to nothing accomplished during his brief time in office, and was not trusted by other members of the government at the time, placing him at number 4 on the list. Next we have Franklin Pierce. History does not fondly remember Northern men with Southern sympathies. Pierce was from New Hampshire, but defended the rights of slave owners and criticized anti-slavery agitation. Serving as 14th president from 1853 to 1857, he was rejected by his own party for renomination and did not serve a second term. He was also known as a weak general during the Mexican-American War. His downfall was in his support of the Kansas-Nebraska Act, which heightened North-South tensions, but Pierce did not handle the repercussions, eventually leading to the Civil War. Pierce had little impact on policy reform, and no staggering events during his presidency deserve historical remembrance, ranking him number 3 on the list. In the number 2 slot, we have Millard Fillmore. Fillmore became the 13th president following the death of Zachary Taylor. He quickly dismissed all of Taylor's cabinet members, and it took more than 2 months to completely fill his new cabinet, putting most presidential business on halt. After his rocky start, the policies that he was able to enforce created further tension between the North and South, and his Whig Party was crumbling. His new Secretary of State, Daniel Webster, with Fillmore's support, passed a compromise bill on the issue of slavery. The Compromise of 1850 failed miserably when both sides came out unsatisfied. Fillmore was an uninspiring president who tried to settle conflict of slavery between the North and the South rather than put an end to it once and for all, putting him at number 2 on the list of forgotten presidents. And finally, we have Benjamin Harrison. Harrison won the election of 1888 to become the 23rd president of the United States. He ran on the Republican platform, although he had fundamental disagreements of many of their positions. He's largely forgotten due to his unfulfilled promise to annex Hawaii and unsuccessful efforts to convince Congress to support the construction of the canal in Nicaragua. His presidency was overshadowed by his grandfather, 9th President William Henry Harrison. Most people remember William Henry Harrison, who served just 1 month in office before dying of pneumonia, which he contracted in the cold weather during his inauguration. The biggest reason that Ben Harrison is so forgettable is because he served as president during a time when the public largely distrusted the government, the period between Abraham Lincoln and Teddy Roosevelt that was filled with corruption. His reputation will forever be tainted by his lack of successes and the sentiments of the government associated with the Gilded Age, earning him the number 1 spot on the list.